Hi and welcome back for another CottageCutz YouTube video tutorial. This is Marla with Mad About Cards and Crafts. Today we're creating a card using the spring daffodils from the Scrapping Cottage. Here's a look at the inspiration. You see those beautiful peachy pink daffodils. That is what I'm going to try to mimic with my card today. I am going to die cut these pieces out using some 80-pound accent opaque cardstock. We're going to do a little bit of ink blending with my Pink Fresh Studio inks. I'm starting off with, I think this is Peach Fizz or Peach Fuzz, and a small blending brush. I'm adding that peach color to the center of each of the layers. You'll notice that I'm making sure to keep those tips of the flowers white, and that is because if you went back and looked at that photograph, there are little lines in each of the daffodils that adds texture to them, and I am going to mimic that with a little bit of Copic coloring. So I just wanted to make sure that I was adding my ink blending to the center of the flowers and moving out, leaving those tips white. I'll add a little bit of this pink cherry blossom to lighten this up. I thought that it was a little bit more of a brown orange and I wanted a little more of the pink in the color, so I just took the cherry blossom ink and another small blending brush to add that additional color in. You'll notice that I am using a Altenew mat. This came from my stamp wheel. I have traded in my Cricut mat for this one. It works so great. It never loses its stickiness. And one of the things that I really appreciate about it is that it holds my small ink cubes, especially when I'm doing my ink blending with these cubes, because holding them in my hands with my fingernails is a little bit more difficult. And if I sat them on my glass mat, they would move all over the place when I tried to add my blending brush. But using this mat from Altenew, which I believe they do sell separately, is really a godsend, and it works so beautifully with my projects for the Scrapping Cottage. I'm going to bring in some R markers. I'm starting with an R12. This R12 is a very peach color. It matches the peach fizz or fuzz very well, but I wanted to have more of a contrast, and so I'm bringing in this R5, which is going to be very stark. It's not the color that I'm looking for, but it's going to be the closest color once I blend it out a little bit more. If you're not familiar with Copic markers, as your colors get lighter, there is more of a concentration of what they call the colorless blender. More alcohol in it, which is going to mute the colors a little bit more. So it's the higher the number is, the higher the concentration of true color. The lower the number is, the more alcohol that is in that marker that is going to lighten up those tones. And so in order to lighten up that red, I brought back in the R12 and I blended that out, and then I came back in again with the R11 marker, and I'm muting that red. You can see when I lay this down right here how bright that red is, and then once I bring in the R12 and the R11 and go over those areas, it's going to lighten it up and give me the color that I'm looking for. Once I add that little tube over the top, I realize I want to bring my lines out a little bit more. This is a very delicate thing to do. I was very conservative with my lines in the center because I don't want to color up my ink blending, but I do want to add those lines for dimension, and so I was very conservative with my first application, and then I can go back in and just determine how much more I need to add. So it's always better to add less than to overdo it and then cover up all of the work from the ink blending that you started off with. And this is simply just a little bit of a flicking motion that I'm doing. I'm really not doing any special coloring. For the stamen, these are stamen or are they pistils? Can't remember my anatomy. I added the cherry blossom, which was the same pink color that I used on my flowers. And then for each of these stems, they are going to be darker at the bottom where the sunlight is not making its way through, and they're going to be lighter at the tip where the sunlight is actually hitting them. So I'm using this key lime ink and a blending brush, being very heavy-handed towards the bottom of each of these leaves, and then lightening up my touch as I bring them up towards the tip. I'm going to add a little bit more depth and dimension using a second color. This one is called Grassy Knoll, and I'm just lightly touching different areas, trying to add a little bit more color, variation in color to those areas. I'm going to add a little bit more color with this ballet slipper. It's more of a darker pink, and so it's going to give me a little bit more contrast in those areas as well. Now, some of these flowers are going to be, they're not going to be fully adhered to my card panel, and I want to make sure that I have a little bit more thickness to them. So I did die cut the flowers only, so the tubes and the base flower. I cut them a second time from the 80-pound accent opaque cardstock, and I'm just matching those up, gluing them together, giving a little bit more bulk or heft to those pieces so that they are really strong. And then of course I love dimension, and so for each of the tubes I'm going to use these small dots, and I'm going to add the tubes to the flowers. Now I mixed them up a little bit when I took them off my mat, and so now I have to try to figure out which tube goes with which flower. I'm looking at the packaging, trying to determine what's the right way for these to go, and eventually I get them right. There is one little flower that is more like a bud that stands alone, and I did add foam tape to the back of that flower as well. So here's where I figure out which tube is going to go with each flower, and it's going to go with this one right here. And then I'll move the tube off of the flower that I first started with, and now we have them right. So moving on to my background, I do have a 4 1/4 by 5 1/2 inch top folding card base. I brought in my Arches dies, and I am going to die cut some frames that I'll be using on this card today. This is the urn. So I believe it's Garden Tub and Urn. I wanted to have that same pink color for the urn. Hindsight's always 20/20. So here's where I'm adding that cherry blossom. I probably could have done a little bit more shading with my Copic marker on that, but I didn't. So I just added that cherry blossom to it, and I set it aside. And then this is the background that I was talking about. I have some pattern paper from my stash. There's my arch frame, and I did add foam tape to the back of that as well because I do love that dimension. Going back to the urn, I really wish that I would have added a little bit more Copic coloring to just add a little bit of shading to the urn, but I did know in my mind that I wanted that urn to be a little bit darker than the pink that was in my flowers. And in order to do that, if you use clear embossing ink, so this is VersaFine clear ink, and some clear embossing powder over the top, when you heat set it and that embossing powder dries, it is going to give your ink blending or coloring a much darker appearance than what it is. So if you watch it right here, it's pretty light. And then once I bring that heat to it, it is going to darken up. So it is going to give me a little bit more contrast, which is what I was looking for. Again, I have die cut 3 more of the urns. What I'm going to do is there is a little slit in each of the urns, and I didn't want to have to worry about whether or not I glued them closed. And so what I'm going to do here is I'm going to start building my flowers, and I'm going to sandwich those urns together. So I'm going to start adding my stems, and as I'm arranging the stems, I'm adding a little bit of glue to the bottom of each of the stems so that it will kind of stick to the urn, and I'll place everything. I'll keep bringing it back to that card base, making sure that they're not hanging too far over the edges, that I have a nice balance. And once I get those in place, then I'll take the other two urns and I'll add them to the back, and then that will give me a little bit of sandwich. When I add that glue to the white urns, what I end up doing is not going over I'm not going too close to the area where my slits are, or where the die cut the slits in the urn. I want to make sure that I leave a little bit of wiggle room. So if I need to move some of these, because you can see I didn't glue them down completely, I just added just a touch of glue to hold them in place, but still give a little bit of wiggle room when I'm ready to commit. So I'm just making sure that I like this arrangement. I like where my leaves and stems are, and I think I'm pretty happy with that. So now I'm going to start sandwiching this together. Turn that over. And so it's twofold. It's going to help hold my leaves in place, and it's also going to it also allowed me to arrange everything without having to worry about all of the slits being aligned. In theory they would be, but sometimes if you add glue to the wrong spot, then you're stuck and you have to work a little bit harder, and I like to try to work a little bit smarter than harder. Because there is foam tape on that arch, I do need to add foam tape to the top of the urn. The bottom of that urn is actually going to glue onto, I'm going to adhere it onto the frame. So I'll add a little bit of glue there. Remove the backing from my foam tape. And then we'll add that, and then I'll be able to make a little bit of, there's going to be a little bit of adjusting with those leaves, but it's much easier because I did have the majority of them placed in the area that I wanted them to begin with. Now those urns, you can see that the urn is a separate die. It is not a die plate like these daffodils are. So the tub has a separate die from the urn, which is nice. I'm going to add a little bit more foam tape because, again, some of these die cut pieces are going to be hanging where the arches, and that arch does have the foam tape on it, so I want everything to remain level. In order to do so, I need to strategically place foam tape underneath the petals that are not hanging over that frame. And here's where I'm just gluing some of these other pieces in. Again, I did leave a little bit of wiggle room when I added the glue to the urn. And then once I figure out where I want this last stem, everything is going to come together quite easily. I'll place the other two flowers where they belong, and then that will complete my card for today. I did want to mention that there is a sale going on over at the Scrapping Cottage. I will have that linked, as well as the products that I have used, in the description box below. So you can head over there, check out the Easter sale that's going on, pick yourself up a few of the sale products. I have not looked at the sale, so I can't tell you exactly what it is, but I do know that they always have a nice sale over the holidays, so make sure that you head on over and check that out. If you haven't checked out the blog, we do have some creators that do not create videos, but they do create blogs and have created some beautiful spring projects, so you can check those projects out there as well. I'll link that in the description box, as well as the Instagram account that you can follow. Once I finish with this, I am going to use my stickles. I have some crystal stickles, and I'm going to use that on the stamens just to add a little bit of sparkle and shine. I like having that little bit of glitter on my cards, whether it be with embellishments or whether it be with the stickles or maybe a little bit of gold paint. That's just something, along with dimension, that I always tend to incorporate into my cards. So this is a step that you certainly could skip. I just, again, like those little details. I want to thank you so much for joining me today. Please make sure that you leave any questions that you have in the comment box below. Here's a close-up of those beautiful flowers. Until next time, have a fabulous day and have a very happy Easter. Thanks for watching.